Welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. I am really looking forward to this conversation today. I have Chief Thomas from Denver PD, 38th year experience in law enforcement. This is his fourth year as Chief of Police, and through his tenure in executive leadership, officer wellness and resiliency has been a key priority. So I'm really looking forward to having him today on the show. Welcome, Chief Thomas. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course. I have heard through Reputation a lot about you guys as an organization and how you're leading the charge when it comes to wellness. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the things that you guys are doing and, how you've been able to do that. And I know a lot of people who are listening are also interested in
Sure.
not just the why and the what, but the how, the tactical how you're doing it. So,
Sure.
um, you know, my first question for you is really the why. Why is wellness something that is so important to you as a leader?
Well, it's important because, I think we all get into this work to have a long and productive career and help people. And, but I think that, for so long, we didn't really think about ourselves. We didn't think about our own wellness and, focusing on everybody else's wellness. And I think what we started to see is that, people started to break, because we weren't focusing on our own wellness. And so, I had an opportunity. I was the commander in internal affairs, and I had an opportunity to see how that break actually takes place, and so typically, when we would be advised of someone that may have a fitness for duty issue, we would, have them come in and we would review the information that suggests that they are not fit for duty. And then if we, concurred with that assessment, then we would essentially just give them a letter that said, yeah, you're not well. Give us your gun and come back and see us when you're well.
Mhm.
And and I saw what a kick in the gut that was, and how we never set them up for success, and then we didn't help them advance towards success. And so that really, I think, kind of lit a fire under me and understanding that we need to do things better. And so, I did a lot of extensive research. I identified some partners within the agency that I could work together with to put together a platform that I thought would be successful. We actually studied the airline industry, identifying some of the things that they do for their pilots and making sure that they are well, and don't do things that ultimately become misconduct. And so, I put together a program, presented it to then Chief White at the time. And he was a little reluctant just because he was old school, but I think he trusted me and I think saw some value in it. And so he allowed me to continue. And so we started to, kind of removing the whole fitness for duty component from the Internal Affairs Bureau and kind of housing it elsewhere so that there's no perceived association between someone not being well and someone in misconduct. And so what I had assumed all along is, well, no wonder no one comes forward and says, hey, I have a problem, because that's what happens to them. And no wonder partners don't come forward and say, hey, I think my partner has a problem, because we tended to unintentionally, I think, mistreat people. And so now that I think we are separating wellness from misconduct, and having some very intentional connection to resources to make sure people are well or get people well. I think what we've seen is people being more inclined to raise their hand and say, hey, I need help, or partners saying, hey, I think my partner could use some help. And so I think that we've advanced pretty far in terms of building our wellness initiative. And so I'm quite proud of what we've built.
Thank you. I've said this before on this podcast, but you just described what I believe to be true as far as the steps of forward progress And the first one is awareness. I always think step one is awareness. And so that's exactly what you just described. You were looking around and being like, there's an issue here. There's a challenge here, and having awareness around that particular challenge. And then the second one is education. So you said that I started doing research, trying to figure out, what is it that we can do better? What are those resources and those changes that can be made? And then the third one is action or implementation. Okay, we know that there's a problem. Now we know, some of the solves to that problem. And then how can we implement the solves to that problem? And so, do you feel like that was kind of the strategy or even the steps that you guys took? And what did you see as a result of those actions and that implementation? Did you see that people were starting to trust again and starting to, kind of raise their hand and come forward? And how long did that take? Because we know it takes a while to build trust, and people are kind of looking at, how other people are treated in order to decide how they want to proceed.
Yeah, I mean, we probably started this work in 2014, 2015, and we really were, trying to build the plane while flying it. And so I think it took a while for not just the rank and file to trust, but even for the leadership to trust that
Mhm.
this is the right way to go and that this is going to work. And I think that, as we have evolved, I think as the profession has evolved and recognized, the need for a focus on wellness, I think that there's greater trust, there's greater reliance, I think, on all of the resources that are available. I mean, we've always had, I think, a pretty robust peer support network, but now we're connected to a lot of professional networks that supply services. And so I think that people, now that they know of what we have available, I think they're much more inclined to use those services. And I think that what they, and this is what I think what was really key is they didn't see any negative impact from that. Like they didn't, there was very little awareness from others because, we were very, discreet in what we did. And so, and then, that there were no, negative consequences that were suffered by people that, that raised their hand and said, hey, I need help. And so I think that as that has continued to evolve, I think that the trust has continued to build.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate you saying, hey, it took a while, but it was worth it.
Oh,
And sometimes I think that, we live in a world now of instant gratification, and we want things to work now. We want things to happen right now. And so for you to say, hey, like, this was an evolution of
mhm.
wellness and effort that
Yeah,
happened, and the pursuit of what we were looking for, to get our people well and to have the resources available was worth the
yeah.
time and effort that it took to get there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you about sort of another evolution, and maybe this is a future question, but we really evolved in terms of how we handled our critical incidents, our officer involved shootings. When I came on the job, 38 years ago, you would get into a police shooting or some other kind of critical incident. You literally would just kind of be granted 3 days off, and you were expected to come back to work, and there was no consideration about your wellness, how you were, how that incident had impacted you, nothing. And then we sort of evolved from that to putting what we would call it a non-line assignment, but really that just meant working the front desk at some district station, and you would sit there until the DA would come up with a clearance letter, basically saying that your actions were lawful. And sometimes that would take some time, and not because it was not a justified shooting, but because, the DAs had their other, responsibilities, and sometimes it just took a while. And so here that officer is sitting there thinking, why is this taking so long? Am I in trouble? Is there something wrong? Um, and while we're putting that additional stress and pressure on them, we've still not addressed any of the trauma that they have gone through in that incident. And so, the chief that followed the initial chief, Chief White, Chief Payson, he and I really recognized that we're wasting all of this time while we're waiting for to return these officers back to service. And so, we came up with this sort of reintegration process where, yes, we would take you offline, but we were really unconcerned about when the district attorney would acknowledge that it was a lawful, incident. We really were just focused on the officer's wellness, connecting them with services, really giving them that tactical pause to go to the academy and focus on their nutrition and focus on exercise and other healthy behaviors, and even kind of like slowly reintegrate them back into their normal course of duty. We would take them back to the scene to see if that uncovers any trauma. Have them go through a simulator with maybe a very similar situation and see what kind of trauma that brings up, and have them shoot for qualification and do all of these things that may bring up trauma so that that can be addressed. And then we put them with a partner, when they send them back to the district. And that way, they're not, responding to the very same type of call that they had their incident in, by themselves. And so very
Yeah.
intentional efforts to really, get to those, to that trauma. When we first started doing this, I think officers were like, why are you treating me different? And so I think that there was some reluctance to kind of go through the steps and the maturation of this program. But now I think people appreciate it because they see that, one, they see that we care, and two, we expose them to healing that they may not have even recognized that they needed. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from officers that have gone through the program who have said, "Hey, I didn't realize it at the time, the day of or the day after my incident, but weeks later, I recognize that I really did need that, and I appreciate having that opportunity."
Yeah. Well, and the message is so different. Like the first scenario that you said used to happen felt like, okay, we're just going to put you over here and we're going to kind of just like
Yeah,
leave you there until we know something else. And the message now is, hey, like we want to make sure that you're good. And we're going to put that time and energy and effort and the resources into you
yeah,
and your wellness and your longevity. And so the message that you're sending as an organization is so much different now than it used to be. And I could see that. I could see how maybe the first couple people are like, what is
yeah,
this? Like kind of uncertain of what's happening, but I can see now how they would be appreciative of that because what else are you going to do? Sit by yourself, at the front desk and,
right,
and question things, or are you going to get better? So I like that a
right,
lot. Yeah.
right,
You said that you started modeling things after the airline or the airline profession.
yeah,
What is that? I want to circle back because you mentioned it a little bit, but what exactly did they do that you were like, we need
yeah.
to model after them?
Yeah. So it was quite a long time ago that I studied this. And so I think that it is called the HIMSS program, HIMS. And I don't recall what that acronym stands for, but basically it's a recognition that, that people in high performance jobs like policing and being a pilot, you have built up stress, you have built up trauma, you have a responsibility for the safety of people. And I think that sometimes there's a reluctance to acknowledge that you have a problem. And then so you just kind of keep going forward until you break.
Mm,
And so what the airlines started to do is really start to advertise, hey, um, if you let us know early on that you have a problem, we don't care what kind of problem it is, we will put you on the path to address your challenge. But if you don't tell us, and this just continues to build and build and build until you break, and that break point, results in some sort of misconduct, there's nothing we can do for you. And so what you would see is pilots that would be caught, impaired, drunk in the cockpit. Um, well, now it's too late. If you'd have told us before that cockpit door closed, hey, I have a problem that I'm trying to manage. I really need some help. We'll get you that. We'll give you that timeout. connect you with those resources that can help you. And it's not going to cost you your job. It's not going to cost you your longevity and those kinds of things. So we really wanted to model that. And so people can raise their hand and say, "Hey, I have a problem," um, and we'll give them that time out. We'll kind of pull them, out and plug them into where they can be connected to resources. And there's no association with punishment at all. They don't lose any time. They don't lose any longevity. They don't lose, so there's no, negative or disciplinary outcomes at all. And what we're hoping that we can coach is, hey, people have problems, but let us know so that we can help you get well. But if you just keep it to yourself, then eventually you're going to break and it's going to result in misconduct, and then there's really nothing that we can do for you. And so we found that was a good model. I think that because it was connected to a very successful industry, I think that's what helped convince other police leaders that this is a direction to go.
Yeah, I think it's really effective to kind of zoom out and look at other industries and try to figure out what they do really well and
Yeah,
how that might apply to the things that, we're doing. Obviously, we're in different lines of work, but I try to do the same thing of like, okay, well, what are professional athletes doing when it comes
yeah,
to wellness? And how is that impacting performance and longevity, and injury prevention? Or, what is this industry? You said airline industry. What are they doing that is
yeah.
really well? And so I think it's a really effective strategy to zoom out because sometimes we get so kind of fixated on our specifics
Mhm.
that we kind of miss maybe some out of the box thinking and some things
Yeah.
that could apply that would be really effective.
Yeah, yeah, and I think regardless of the profession, whether it's policing or the airline industry, I think every industry. I mean, they invest a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of training, and a lot of effort into building their people up, and we want them to have long, successful careers. Well, if we want that, I think we have to create a support system to sustain that.
100%. I think that this is a question that a lot of people have, and I'm curious your perspective on this, but how much of the responsibility for wellness is on the organization and how much of the responsibility is on the individual? What do you think maybe that tipping point is, or do you
Yeah.
think it's a 50-50 partnership?
I mean, I really do think it's a 50-50 partnership. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly an individual, has some personal responsibility.
Yeah.
But I think that it's not all on the individual. And so I think that the agency has a responsibility too. I mean, we can't just tell people, hey, you have a responsibility to address your trauma and to be well and stay well. I think we have to recognize our responsibility to provide those resources and make those connections and let them know that they are cared for and supported.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's an interesting dynamic that I'm seeing now. We're talking about organizational wellness. Obviously, I've interviewed a lot of leaders and I've met a lot of leadership who are really supportive of this. And there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of forward movement in wellness, but then the engagement, the participation maybe isn't where, people
Mhm.
want it to be. And so it's like, the message to the individuals within the organization, if you are in a place where leadership is supportive of this and they are providing you resources, take advantage of them.
Right,
Take that personal responsibility, for your own wellness too. And so I think that that is the conversation of, I think we've reached a point where a lot of organizations are prioritizing it and do have the resources. And so now how do we encourage people to want to take care of themselves as well?
right, right.
Yeah. And that's a hard question. I think that I think as humans, we don't want to admit sometimes when we need things. We don't want
Right.
that perception of weakness. We talk a lot about stigma, and I think that to a certain extent, stigma still does exist, even
Oh,
though,
for sure.
we've made it a long way. What do you think? Maybe I should ask this in a different way. How do you think we can break stigma? Do you think it'll ever fully be broken, or do you think there's always going to be a little bit of stigma around mental health?
You know, I imagine there's always going to be a little bit of stigma, and that just means that we have to work harder to overcome that. You know, I think we
Mm,
have to continue to reinforce, the need for wellness, the importance of wellness, make sure people are familiar and aware of everything that's out there. I think it's even important to when we have people that are willing to share their story, to have them share their story so that people can actually put a sort of a face and a scenario to, well, that could have been me, and they're in a much better place now because they came forward, and and I can do that too,
yeah.
and so I think in terms of that, that individual responsibility, as well, like morale. Like, I think that certainly organizations have some responsibility as it relates to addressing employee morale, but I think employees at the same time, I think, have some responsibility too. And I think, it's important for us to continue. We can't just stand up a wellness unit and employ all these resources. We can't just do that and then just kind of wait for it to work. I think we have to continue to push it. And so, not only do we, make sure that all of our new recruits are aware of all of the resources that are available. We probably on a monthly basis push out information about all the resources that are available. Because when you're in the academy, you're just focused on everything that you need to learn, to work on the street. And then when you're working on the street, your day-to-day focus is the things that you're doing to keep communities safe. And so I think sometimes it gets pushed to the back of your mind, all the resources that are available. So I think you have to constantly remind people that there are things out there, and I think that constant reminder not only does it help people continue to keep focus on the things that are available for them, but I also think it reinforces the fact that you care. You
Yeah.
didn't just say it one time; you say it over and over and over again.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think that we could even put this in like such a simple example. Like, how many times do you have to be reminded? I'll say this from my perspective. How many times is sometimes I have to be reminded, by like my spouse that, we have dinner. Like
Mhm.
if I'm not told constantly, hey, remember, got dinner on Friday, like
Yeah,
I'm gonna forget, or, can we be in a relationship and, tell our spouse one time that we love them and then just
yeah,
think, oh, they're just gonna remember forever
yeah.
and we're never ever gonna have to say it again. I do think that we have to constantly remind people we
Mhm.
forget we're busy. Reinforcement is really good. I really appreciated that you said sharing your story. That is really scary, I think,
Oh
for a
yeah,
lot of people to have that vulnerability to share some of the challenging parts of your life or your career. And I used to be of the mindset of like, you don't share any of that stuff.
yeah.
You put on, this hard exterior and you make sure everyone knows that you're, and I'm going to put this in quotes, that you're like really strong and
Mhm.
that's how you operate. And I actually had a chief one time, look me in the eye and was like, "Tell me your story." And he had done some research on me and knew that I came from a really challenging childhood and knew I had trauma earlier in my life. But I didn't know he had done that research. He had like done his like, police vetting on me,
Sure.
and I was like, "What do you mean? I'm perfect. I'm good. Like I don't have a story." Like, and he was like, "Nope. Like I did research. Like I know you do. So tell me." And that very first time that I opened up and I shared a little bit of, what I had gone through in my story was really scary. And I did feel very vulnerable in that situation. And then afterwards, I think I had a realization that um, it's such a strength and it helps people. It
Yeah,
helps people around you to also recognize that they're human and that it's okay to go through hard things. And now I really view this as my superpower. Like I
yeah,
have the ability to share those things with other people to help
yeah.
them. And so anyone who's listening, I think it's an important reminder that if you have gone through hard things, you can use that as a superpower and a strength. to help other people too. And I think it's almost a responsibility that we have, to be able to share those things. And I don't feel weak when I do that. I actually feel really strong. I
Yeah,
feel like, I can talk about these things because I overcame them and because I had the resiliency to keep going and to be able to be on these platforms today. And there's nothing stronger than that. So
yeah,
I think that's a really important reminder that if you have a story, if you've been through some stuff and you got to the other side of things, share it.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's so helpful for other people to hear it because I think that
Mhm.
they actually, I think they sense your strength when you tell your story. And I think that then they start to think, well, if they can do that, then so can I,
Yeah.
and if they can survive this, then so can I.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. And I think not even just, surviving, but if they can thrive, like I want to
Yeah.
thrive like that too, And so I agree with you. And are you seeing the same thing that I'm seeing that, when it comes to stigma, I'm seeing now less stigma from a leadership perspective. I'm seeing actually a lot of leadership who are really supportive of wellness.
Mhm.
I'm seeing a lot of stigma from a peer-to-peer perspective. Are you seeing kind of the same thing?
Yeah, unfortunately. And I think, I think that with leadership comes a lot of growth and a lot of transformation. And so I think you tend to see things from a different perspective and maybe even a higher level. And whereas officers, I think that um, a lot oftentimes, I mean, obviously they're very concerned about their community, but I think sometimes they're just really focused on themselves
Mhm.
and how are people perceiving me, and so I think that's why I think it's much more difficult to get people to trust. And I was thinking that the hardest thing that I would have to do is get the chief at the time to trust that this was going to be an effective program, and it was actually not that difficult to sell for that individual. But the real challenge and the real work was getting the rank and file to believe that this will work, and that you can be connected to services that can help, and that there won't be any repercussions that you'll suffer, and you won't be seen differently by your peers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, and it kind of goes back to what we talked about looking at other industries. And I like to look a lot at the, professional athleticism or, athletics and kind of how they operate, like what are the resources that they put in place, how do they operate as a team, and I draw a lot of parallels. And one of the things that I find to be really interesting is if you look at a professional sports team, there's humans, right? Different personalities,
Mhm.
but same shared mission, right? Like
Yeah,
they want to get to the end and they want to perform at a really high level and maybe eventually win the game, And so,
right.
um, I would imagine that within the team dynamic, there are some people who maybe don't like each other that much, right? Or like maybe personalities kind of,
Mhm.
butt heads or whatever.
Sure.
But they operate as a team and they understand that you're only as strong as your weakest link. And so, this idea of we're going to raise each other up and
Yeah,
we're going to train together, we're going to support each other, we're going to make sure that we all have all the things that we need physically, mentally, because they do that. They do physical training, of course. They have mental training as well. They do rest and recovery together. There's no judgment on what it takes for them to reach the pinnacle together as a team. And I really, I would love to see more of that, like team environment within an
mhm.
organization of we're not judging each other for and I'm going to put this in quotes like for a weakness or for needing certain training or certain support. We're encouraging that because we're recognizing that we're as strong as our weakest link and
Right.
we need to lift each other up and build each other up in order for us to all get to where we want to go and hopefully get to the end of our careers as whole as we possibly can and have a long
Right.
retirement. But I think that, I see a little bit of a different mentality sometimes. And so I'm hoping through these conversations, like maybe, that can start to shift a little bit where it's like, hey, like you guys are a team.
Yeah.
Let's stop judging each other and let's, start supporting each other as much as we can.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
So tell us a little bit. I know you've already explained some of the things that you guys are doing, but for anyone who's listening, and we have a lot of leadership who listen to this podcast and are looking for ways to improve their organizational wellness. And so if you could maybe just bullet point maybe some of the top things that have been really successful for you guys, maybe how you've been able to do that, the budgets and support can be really challenging sometimes. And maybe any advice you have to leaders who are trying, like actively trying to build a wellness program, where to start and how to do it.
I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to identify partners, and I think that we have found partners with insurance carriers and other firms that do psychology and that kind of work. And I think most police agencies have whether it's through their civil service or whether their hiring entity is, they probably have like a police psychologist that does all the psychological evals and everything like that. And most have like a peer support program. And if you are having a struggle, there's that one guy that you've been familiar with since the academy because he's the guy that did your psych eval to get on the job. And I would encourage everybody to recognize that that's just not enough. You need to really connect with true professionals, and I think you have to have sort of a wide range of services available, and I think that they need to be sort of culturally competent. I think that that I think that there's comfort in talking to people and working with people that know you and have exposure to you and people like you. Because I think I don't know how true it is, but I think that in policing, I think we think we're different. We're different from other professions and other entities. And so we feel like, well, I can't share my story with someone who doesn't understand the things that I go through day to day. And maybe some of that is true. But I think that having sort of a wide range of experts and people in the field that you can connect with, and I think that it has to be convenient for the individual too. Like you can't just be somebody who's available 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It has to be someone that you can maybe call on a 24/7 basis, because that need to connect with someone, that need to have someone check in on your wellness or help you get through the rest of that day. That might happen, at midnight on a Saturday. And I would hate for that person to feel like they have to survive until Monday in order to get the help that they need, because that might not happen. They may not survive that long. And so I think it's important to have you know services that are available for anybody at any time at any place. Um, and I think that confidentiality is important.
Mhm.
Um, it's I'm sure there are a lot of things that are going on in our wellness, world that I'm completely unaware of, and I don't want to be aware of the struggles that people are having necessarily. I just want to know that there is a support system out there that is going to help take care of them, that is going to help them become well, that's going to help them, get back in the saddle and continue with a long, healthy career. And so I think maybe the other thing that I just kind of jumped into my head is that, yeah, I think you have to kind of remove your ego from that. Like you can't feel like you need to know about or be aware of everything, because sometimes that's the problem. Sometimes the problem is I don't want to say what's going on with me because I don't want people to know. I don't want my supervisor, I don't want my command officer to know because I don't know how that's going to impact me.
Right. A couple things that you said a few times that I wanted to kind of bring back up is this idea that it's all about the people. The ROI, I say this every time, the ROI is the people.
Yeah.
Like anyone who doesn't know ROI, return on investment, right? Like,
Yeah.
everyone always asks that, like how are we gonna, like, what is it, are we spending money in the right ways? What's the return on
Right.
investment? It's the people. And you've said this a few times. What can we do? And we should be exhausting every um, possible resource out there, have a wide range. You said it's a wide range of different resources that are going to help our people to thrive.
Yeah.
And what are those things? And then beyond that, how can we create the trust and the culture within the organization to where our people know that not only are these things available, but that they have the safety and the confidence to be able to get those resources so that they can thrive. And
Right.
that's the goal, right? And so I appreciate you saying that a few times. And you also said evolution a few times, which is, this idea that it's not a one and done. It's not a check the box
Right.
and, throw it in the closet and say you have it. It's a constant reinforcement, reevaluation, and growth of what that looks like long term. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Because, just, thinking about that, I mean, I think a lot of times when we think about wellness, we think about, well, how does somebody recover from a critical incident like a shooting, or how does someone overcome sort of the stresses of the job? And I don't think we think about some of the off the job stresses, the marriages, the divorces, the birth of a child, the promotion. I don't think that we really take into consideration the kinds of stresses that those bring upon an individual. And so we try as best we can to know what's going on in our officers' lives. What's going on with their children, what's going on with their extended family, because there may be some stressors that are being built up that that need to be addressed, and we want to be able to be there to provide that support. And so our wellness coordinators, they do a lot of cold calls
mm,
because we'll hear through the grapevine that someone has a relative that is just passed, or some other stressor that's an off the job stressor. But those off the job stressors, I think, can have on the job impacts.
yeah, 100%. I mean, it's an important reminder to know that like we're dealing with humans, you know,
Yeah.
and there's life stuff and there's work
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
they're both equally as important, and it's an important reminder too. So thank you, and I want to be respectful of your time. So my final question is
Sure.
for the younger generation.
Mhm.
We know that the younger men and women who are showing up to do the job today are going to be the
Mhm.
future leaders within law
Yeah.
enforcement. So what words of wisdom would you share with the younger generation?
Yeah.
Maybe something that you wish that you would have known as a younger officer,
Yeah.
or something that's helped you along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. I had to, chuckle a little bit, when I first heard the question, because I'm not sure if a 22-year-old Ron Thomas would listen to, the Ron Thomas today. But, I think that there's a couple things that I would stress. One is to have and hold on to a why.
Mm,
So, I took this job because I saw it as an opportunity to have a positive impact on people's lives, and I feel like I've been able to do that or influence that every day. And so when I have bad days, when things don't go exactly the way that I had wanted them to, focusing on why I do this, helps me move on to the next day.
yeah.
And I tell our recruits in the academy that they need to have and hold on to a why, because I think it's going to help you have that long and prosperous career when you continue to remember and be driven by what brought you here in the first place. The other thing that I would say is, it's important, I think, to have sort of a work life, a healthy work life balance. And I don't necessarily mean, to spend half your time at work and half your time in your home life. But I think what I really mean is that you have to have outside interests. For me, it's golf. For others, it could be fishing or traveling or anything like that. I think it's important to have outside interests and not just be consumed with policing. I mean, certainly policing is important and keeping communities safe is important, but you're important too. And so
Yeah.
have some outside interests. And then along with that is, continue to stay connected to people outside of law enforcement. I think sometimes we tend to travel only in circles of other people that do what we do, and I think that it I think prevents you from seeing the world in different ways, and I think that that is healthy. And so I encourage people to, obviously you want to stay connected to your family because that's your strong support system, but also, staying connected to friends and others that are outside this profession, because I think that helps keep you grounded as well.
Yeah, love it. Thank you so much. And I agree with you. I think 22-year-old me wouldn't listen to me either. But I appreciate your time. I appreciate your words of wisdom and everything that you guys are doing in law enforcement, wellness, and resilience. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Of course.